All right, so we're diving into a case today that's really perplexing. It's the story of Mary Day, who disappeared in 1981, and everyone, for years, thought she'd been murdered. Then, get this, 20 years later, a woman shows up in Phoenix claiming to be her.
You really start to question everything as you go through this case, Like just when you think you've got a handle on things, another piece of information comes along and throws everything into doubt. It's really ambiguous, this whole narrative. And the source material really paints a picture of some deep, deep tragedy.
Yeah, no doubt. It's one of those stories that just sticks with you. And as you try to make sense of what happened to Mary, you realize pretty quickly that her family dynamics play a huge role, especially her mother, Charlotte Pressler. We're talking multiple marriages, affairs, a whole bunch of kids who, it seems, didn't exactly get the kind of mothering you'd expect.
Right. And that lack of stability from the get-go, it really sets the stage for everything that follows. It makes you question everything right from the start. Like, is this woman in Phoenix really Mary Day? Or is she an imposter? Or, and this is where it gets really wild, is there something else going on here, something we haven't even considered?
So, to set the scene, Mary Louise Day was born in Little Falls, New York, back in 1968. Pretty small town. And from what we can gather, Charlotte, her mother, already had a bit of a reputation, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? When you look into Charlotte's early life, you see this pattern of unstable relationships. She was married to Hubert Pressler. This was in the late 50s or early 60s. Initially, we thought they didn't have any kids together, but later on, a daughter named Jeannie comes into the picture.
Wow, so a secret daughter.
Exactly. Hubert raised Jeannie after the divorce, and Charlotte kept her existence a secret from her other kids. But even while she was married to Hubert, Charlotte was having affairs, most notably with Charles Day, who would become Mary's father. So yeah, lots of tangled relationships right from the start.
Okay, so lots of moving parts here. So Mary's born in 68 to Charlotte and Charles. Charlotte then divorces Hubert, marries Charles, and they have another daughter, Kathy, Mary's younger sister. But of course, things don't stay calm for long, do they?
Nope, not at all. By 1971, Charlotte has another daughter, Sherry, this time with a guy named Ira Hope. So yeah, you can see how complicated this family tree gets.
Yeah, it's a lot to keep track of. So what was life like for these kids?
Well, Sherry's perspective on being raised by Charlotte is really telling. She said, and I'm quoting here, she had sex, she got pregnant, and she got stuck with us.
Yeah.
That pretty much sums up the lack of a motherly bond,
Yeah.
Makes you think about the kind of environment Mary grew up in.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like a stable, loving home. Was there anything else going on?
Oh yeah, tons. The home environment, from what we can tell, was incredibly chaotic. The girls weren't in school regularly. There's no mention of homeschooling either. Charlotte would often leave these young girls, really young, alone at night while she went out drinking. Charles, even when he was around, wasn't much of a father figure.
Man, that's rough. It's no wonder these kids struggle.
Yeah, it all came to a head when Charlotte attempted suicide. The girls, Mary, Kathy, and Sherry, were placed in emergency foster care with the Waltz family. This actually seemed to be a good thing for them. They were finally enrolled in school, had some stability in their lives. We don't know exactly how long they were with the Waltzes, though.
So during this time, Charlotte's life continued to be, well, let's just say dramatic. She divorces Charles, and then she marries William Hull, who was significantly younger than her, like only 17 at the time.
17. Wow. You have to wonder about the power dynamics there. Anyway, in 1975, William joins the Marine Corps, and then a year later, Charlotte gets custody of the girls again, Mary, Kathy, and Sherry. Even though, she clearly wasn't that interested in being a parent.
Well, clearly something wasn't right there. Did the girls just go along with it?
Sherry definitely didn't. She remembers being picked up by Charlotte from the Waltz family. And she got used to a loving home with them. She resented Charlotte so much that, get this, she peed on Charlotte's head in the car. Talk about a powerful statement.
Oh, wow. I can't even imagine. What did Charlotte do?
It's crazy. She had William turn the car around, took Sherry right back to the Waltzes, and basically said, here, you keep her. Just abandoned Sherry there and then. Sherry ended up being raised by the Waltzes, separated from her sisters.
That's heartbreaking. It really shows you how unpredictable and, well, frankly, uncaring Charlotte could be.
No kidding. And then, to make things even more complicated, Charlotte and William have their own child together in 1978, Billie Jean. And later on, they had a son, but we don't know his name. So, even though she couldn't seem to care for her older daughters, she went on to have more kids.
It's hard to wrap your head around that, isn't it? But then, things take a pretty significant turn. Just a few months after moving to Hawaii, Mary and Kathy's father, Charles Day, die in a car accident.
Yeah, this was in 1978. We're not sure if he had other kids, but he left a pretty sizable inheritance to Mary and Kathy, around $660,000, which they could access when they turned 18. It's important to remember that Charlotte and William were getting government support checks for the girls after Charles died.
So basically a financial motive was already in play.
You got it. This inheritance became a huge factor for Mary and Kathy. They were afraid, even at that young age, that Charlotte and William would try to take it from them. So they came up with this secret code word, Mohawk. It was their way of protecting themselves, their way of having something that only they knew.
That's pretty resourceful for kids that young. It really speaks to the level of distrust they had for the adults in their lives.
Absolutely. And sadly, things got even worse for Mary after the move to Hawaii. For at least 2 years, William abused her, both sexually and physically. This went on until 1980, when the military finally stepped in and put Mary in protective custody for the rest of their time in Hawaii. But get this, even after all that, William kept his job in the military.
That's unbelievable. The system completely failed to protect her. What about Kathy? Was she abused too?
We don't know for sure from the sources, but she was definitely afraid of William and resented both him and Charlotte. Charlotte actually later claimed that Kathy was trying to turn Billie Jean against them. But let's move on to 1981, when William got reassigned to Fort Ord in Seaside, California.
Seaside? Isn't that a pretty small town?
Yeah, relatively small military town. In the spring of '81, Mary was sent back to live with Charlotte. It seems like Charlotte and William mainly wanted her back so they could keep getting those support checks, and because they didn't want her to be permanently removed from their custody. So they basically kept her hidden. She wasn't enrolled in school, rarely seen outside the house. Mary tried to run away a few times, trying to escape, but they always brought her back.
You can really feel her desperation, can't you? Just trying to get away from that horrible situation.
Absolutely. And then we come to the summer of 1981, specifically around July 15th. This is when everything changes. Mary and Kathy were home alone in their first house in Seaside. Charlotte and William had taken their younger kids out to dinner. While they were gone, William's dog, Bubba Brown, got really sick, vomiting, convulsions, foaming at the mouth.
Okay, so what? The dog ate something bad.
Well, that's what you'd think, right? But when William and Charlotte got home, William, who was really attached to this dog, immediately blamed Mary, said she poisoned him. Mary, knowing how William could be, tried to run, but he caught her. They struggled, and she kicked him, trying to get away. William admitted to hitting her in the throat, so the blow might have slid off. It's chilling when you think about it.
Yeah, it sounds like a really volatile situation. So what happened next?
Kathy saw it all. William backed Mary into a corner and kept hitting her. Then he told Kathy to go to her room. The last thing Kathy remembers is seeing Mary with blood coming from her mouth. And that was it. Mary disappeared that night.
So Charlotte and William, what did they say happened?
They told Kathy that Mary ran away, but they never reported her missing to the police, which, raises a huge red flag right there.
Yeah, you'd think if your child went missing, you'd call the police immediately.
Right. And it gets worse. They basically tried to erase Mary's existence. They burned all her photos, her clothes, and told Kathy never to speak her name. They're actively trying to cover something up.
It's so strange. It's the opposite of what you'd expect from grieving parents. What about Kathy? How does she react to all this?
Well, Kathy remembers William doing something really creepy after Mary vanished. He drew an invisible line in the backyard near the shed and told the kids they were never allowed to go there.
Okay, now that's seriously suspicious.
Totally. And there's another weird thing. In 1982, William got reassigned to upstate New York, and Kathy went with him on the drive from California. Somewhere in Utah, near the Bonneville Salt Flats, William stopped the car. Kathy said he had this big rolled-up oriental rug she'd never seen before, and he took it away from the highway and came back without it. Never said a word about it.
A rug? What could have been in that rug?
It's anyone's guess, really. But as Sherry got older, she started to put things together. The silence from her family about Mary was deafening. When she finally asked Kathy about her, Kathy just said, "We don't talk about Mary." It's chilling.
It really shows the level of fear and control in that family.
Yeah, they were serious about keeping quiet. When Kathy was 14, she got kicked out of the house just for asking her younger siblings if they knew anything about Mary.
Wow. So in 1992, Sherry turned 18, and she finally felt like she could do something. She reported Mary missing to the Fort Ord military police.
It was a brave move.
Yeah.
But, like a lot of cold cases, the military police didn't do much. It had been 11 years, and there wasn't even any official record of Mary living on the base.
So it just got swept under the rug.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Then, in 1994, Fort Ord closed down, and Mary's case was handed over to the Seaside Police Department. But they didn't start an investigation either. It's unclear why. Around this time, though, Sherry made a pretty big discovery. She found out she had a half-sister, Jeannie Pressler, Charlotte's daughter from her first marriage, the one she kept secret.
Another secret child. It's like a soap opera.
Oh.
So what about Mary's case? Did it just go cold?
Sherry didn't let it go. In 1999, she contacted the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC. They created an age-progressed image of Mary, which helped keep her story alive.
So it was really Sherry's persistence that kept things moving.
Yeah, and eventually Kathy joined her in pushing for answers. Finally, in 2002, the Seaside Police Department launched an official investigation. Detective Steve Beria was assigned to the case. This was 21 years after Mary disappeared.
It's hard to believe it took that long.
I know, right? So Beria started interviewing Kathy and Sherry. Kathy's story about the night Mary vanished, well, it convinced him this was probably a homicide. Kathy even went back to the old house in Seaside and showed them where she last saw Mary and that forbidden area in the backyard.
So they decided to search the property.
Yeah, they brought in cadaver dogs. And here's the crazy part. 4 different dogs, each working independently, all alerted to the same spot in the backyard. The exact area William had told the kids to stay away from.
Wow, and cadaver dogs, they're pretty reliable, aren't they?
Incredibly, they could smell those decomposition chemicals even years later. So they started digging in that spot and found a belt buckle, a teddy bear, and then a few feet down, a tiny canvas shoe that would have fit a young girl.
So they thought they'd found Mary's body.
Yeah, but when they kept digging, there was no body. It was a huge puzzle.
But the dogs had all alerted to that spot.
Exactly. And to make things even weirder, they tested the soil, sent it to the body farm, and they confirmed that human remains had been buried there at some point.
So someone had definitely been buried there, but it wasn't Mary.
We don't know for sure. It's a mystery. Anyway, in 2003, after years of searching, they finally found Charlotte and William. William was working as a corrections officer in Kansas.
So they finally got to question them. What did Charlotte say?
Her interview was strange. She kept saying things like, "I regret things," but she didn't actually admit to anything. She only talked about V and William as her children, completely leaving out her daughters. She said William told her not to talk about it and claimed that Mary ran away and maybe fell through the cracks. She even said she wasn't sure if they ever called the police about Mary going missing.
And of course, there's no record of William ever reporting her missing. What about William? What did he say?
His interview was just as disturbing. He admitted to being furious that night, like 15 out of 10 angry. He confessed to hitting Mary in the throat, but denied killing her. Then he said this really creepy thing. He said, "That demon could have killed her."
A demon?
Yeah, Charlotte had said earlier that she saw Satan in his eyes. So who knows what was going on there?
So they had all this evidence, William's confession, the stuff buried in the backyard, but they didn't press charges.
Nope. The DA decided not to file charges because they didn't have a body. They couldn't definitively prove that Mary was dead, let alone how she died.
It's so frustrating. All that, and still no justice for Mary.
It is. But then, in November of 2008, things took another crazy turn. The police in Phoenix, Arizona pulled over a truck with stolen plates. One of the passengers said her name was Mary Louise Day. She even gave the same birth date as the missing Mary.
Wait, hold on. Are you saying Mary Day just turned up after all these years?
Well, that's what it looked like at first. The police called Sherry and Kathy right away. Sherry was ecstatic, of course. After all those years of searching, she thought her sister was alive.
That must have been an incredible moment.
It was. But then, things started to get weird. This woman, who everyone started calling Phoenix Mary, had this thick Southern accent. But there was no connection to the South in her background. Linguists who listened to her said she would have had to grow up in the South to talk like that. She also said she didn't remember the incident with the dog, Bubba Brown, and she didn't remember anything about the inheritance or the code word Mohawk.
Okay, so some serious red flags there. What does Kathy think?
Kathy didn't believe it was really Mary, but the police records seemed to match up with what this woman was saying. Sherry really wanted to believe, so she invited Phoenix Mary to live with her in North Carolina.
So did they figure out what was going on? Was she really Mary, or was she an imposter?
That's the million-dollar question. And unfortunately, there's no easy answer. Living with Sherry was tough. Phoenix Mary worked odd jobs, always under the table, using the name Monica D, which she got from a romance novel, apparently. She had a big problem with alcohol. And one time, she even threw a beer bottle at Sherry.
Yikes, that doesn't sound good.
It wasn't. And then, to add to the weirdness, Phoenix Mary emailed the Seaside police, saying she was lying about who she was, but that she took it back and said she didn't know why she'd sent the email.
Okay, that's bizarre.
Oh.
So was she just messing with them?
No one knows for sure. When Steve Cerrone became the chief of police in Seaside, he asked Mark Clark to take a fresh look at the case. Detective Clark had this theory that maybe Phoenix Mary was another one of Charlotte's hidden kids, like Jeannie. He thought maybe Charlotte had contacted this woman after the investigation started and given her Mary's information. It's interesting that Phoenix Mary only got her driver's license 3 weeks before that traffic stop in Phoenix.
So maybe she needed a new identity to avoid getting caught.
Exactly. And then in 2008, while they were investigating a completely different case at Fort Ord, they brought in cadaver dogs again. And guess what? They alerted on a house that William had lived in after the family moved from the first house, the one where Mary disappeared.
So are you saying they might have moved Mary's body?
It's possible. But there's another theory too, one that focuses on the trauma Mary went through. She was abused for years. It's possible she developed dissociative amnesia, which can cause memory gaps. There's actually a study from 1999 that talks about this.
So maybe Phoenix Mary really was Mary, but she'd blocked out huge chunks of her memory because of the trauma.
That's one possibility. And there's another one too. We know that Phoenix Mary was a heavy drinker, had been for years. Alcoholism can cause memory problems too. And then there's a possibility of dissociative identity disorder. DID. It used to be called multiple personality disorder.
DD, how does that fit in?
Well, DD is something that can happen when people experience severe, prolonged trauma, especially in childhood. As a way of coping, they develop these separate identities, or alters. And these alters can have their own memories, their own ways of behaving, even their own accents.
So maybe Phoenix Mary's southern accent was because of an alter.
It's possible. And that weird email she sent to the police, then took back, that could be explained by DD too. Sometimes people with DD switch between alters without even realizing it.
But could someone with DD pretend to be someone else for years, like for financial gain?
It's complicated. Usually switching between alters is involuntary, but we can't rule out the possibility that someone with DD might be aware of their different alters and their actions. On the other hand, maybe Phoenix Mary was just using different names and birthdays to stay hidden after running away from that abusive home. Maybe DD wasn't even a factor.
It's so hard to know what to believe. So they never figured out if Phoenix Mary was the real Mary Day.
Nope. There just wasn't enough evidence to prove either way. But the story doesn't end there. In 2017, the new police chief in Seaside, Judy Vaz, got a call. A woman believed to be Mary Louise Day was terminally ill with cancer and was in hospice care. And she wanted people to know the truth before she died.
So what happened? Did they finally get answers?
Chief Voss decided to take a fresh look at the evidence. She noticed some things that others had missed, like the shoe they found in the backyard. It was too small for a 13-year-old. And when she checked the records, she couldn't find any proof that Charlotte had other hidden children besides Jeannie.
So maybe Phoenix Mary wasn't another secret daughter after all.
Right. And remember how Phoenix Mary got her driver's license just before the traffic stop? Well, it turned out she needed it for emergency gallbladder surgery. A local charity had helped her get her birth certificate, so it wasn't as suspicious as they thought.
So maybe she really was just trying to get her life back on track.
Maybe. Chief Fuzz also found a woman named Myra Ward who had taken care of Mary when she was 15 back in 1983. Myra's ex-boyfriend had a photo of Mary from that time. They had it analyzed for the show 48 hours, and the analysis said there was a 99% chance the girl in the photo was Mary.
Wow, so there was proof that Mary was alive after she disappeared.
Yep, so Chief Oz went to Missouri to meet the woman in hospice. She said Mary just wanted people to believe her, to acknowledge her. Mary died 9 days later. There wasn't even a funeral.
That's just so sad. After everything she went through, she didn't even get a proper goodbye.
I know. And to make things even more confusing, there have been 2 documentaries about the case. Sherry, who'd believed Phoenix Mary was her sister, she started to have doubts. One of the documentaries even said they'd done DNA testing against her father, which wasn't true.
So what's the final verdict? Was Phoenix Mary the real deal or not?
Well, that's the thing. We still don't know for sure. Kathy, Mark Clark, and Steve Cerrone, they still think Phoenix Mary was a fake. But Judy Vaz, she believes the woman she met in hospice, was Mary Day.
It's unbelievable. After all this investigation, all these years, we still don't have a definitive answer.
We're left with this huge question mark. What happened to Mary? Are there remains buried somewhere on William's property? It's incredibly frustrating.
It really makes you think about the impact of trauma, especially on memory, and how sometimes the system just fails to protect the most vulnerable.
Absolutely. And in this case, it seems like no one was ever held accountable for what happened to Mary. Charlotte, in a recent documentary, denied knowing anything about Mary's disappearance.
It's a story that stays with you, that's for sure. It makes you question everything, what's real, what's not, how much our memories can be trusted, and it makes you wonder how many other cases like this are out there, just waiting to be uncovered.
Exactly. And what does it say about us as a society that these things happen? That a child can suffer so much, and yet there's no real justice?
It's a lot to think about, and honestly, it's hard to walk away from this case feeling anything but deeply disturbed and, just sad.